got about, I can't remember, 6 or 8 brand new track kids this year. So we don't have everybody, but we got most of them. And so our numbers have been good for a school of 240 kids.
Well, that's awesome. And one thing that you alluded to, the build of that, was adaptability. And I would say that of all the tools in a coach's toolbox, that's probably one of the absolutes. And I've heard you talk before. We've talked before. We're going to get a little bit of your bio. And for those who have not heard before, we were college teammates for a year. And so we go way back at this point. But as we've gone into the coaching field, I would say that, I want to hear your thoughts, that idea, that the ability to adapt, the ability to sort of evolve over time. I've heard your stories about when you were an early football coach and now where you're at now and some of your philosophy and stuff like that. If you can't adapt your model, if you can't take the sheet, you don't want to be, anchored to a concept, that makes sense. But rep by rep and having to adhere and not being able to vary based on your kids, based on the day and their context, it seems like it can be pretty limiting for a guy that thinks like you.
Yeah, I mean, when I was, everyone should do what's prescribed no matter how you feel, no matter what you've been doing, no matter what sport you're in. I was kind of, this is – they're kids. They should be able to do this. And that was the way that I trained people for those first couple of years. And then I got some feedback from some of the not coaches complaining, but coaches in our district that I respect. That would say, hey, my athletes are saying this, like not just 1 or 2 kids, but several of them are saying, hey, they're pretty beat up on this and this. And they wish that maybe they could do a little bit more of this. And so, cause she would have those conversations, cause she was all in, and this was a female coach, and she was pushing her female athletes in to the class because she thought it was a good thing. But then she was providing some good feedback, and it was like, hey, cause sometimes it's hard when you've been, for the long time, I was a football, basketball guy. A lot of basketball coaches, from a head coaching perspective, don't lift. A lot of them still don't. So I was always thinking that off-season football mentality. Even when I was in basketball, I was trying to get our guys that weren't playing into lifting. And so you're always thinking that mode. And then you get this strength class throughout the day implemented, and it's like, hey, we're going to train. But we just couldn't because, like I said, everyone's, if I played a basketball game, or I played 2 nights in a row because it's a tournament and it's Wednesday and it's supposed to be a heavy squat day, how do these kids feel? And if they're beat up, and I'm going to continue to probably reinforce a bad movement pattern by making them do something, they're not going to have much fun. They have a bigger chance for injury, and there's a great chance that they're not going to take that class again the next year. But if you turn that around and you say, hey, how you feeling? I know you guys, oh, coach, I have this bad homework, blah, blah, blah. So, hey, why don't you go a little lighter day, or you want to do an alternate exercise? And a lot of times they'll say, no, coach, I'll be okay. But it's just letting them know that if they have, if they're not feeling their best, they can come to you and we can work a better way. It's not that, and I always tell them, guys, I understand you wouldn't have took this class as an elective if you're trying to get out of something. So I don't want you to think of it like that, but I want you to have an honest conversation, because I don't know. I have, for our small school, 85 to 90 athletes. I don't know how everyone feels. I mean, I can see what I see, but again, I'm one guy moving around a room. And so I said, you guys just need to be honest, and we can come up with ways so that we stay healthy. That's number one, and number 2 is that we continue to get better. But we have to make sure we stay healthy. And so they respect that. And I think, some of the kids now that have been through the program for 4 years, really appreciated it. And unfortunately for some of them, we didn't get to finish out the school year, at least not yet, for some of these seniors. But, we saw some, and we haven't focused as much on the strength gains and all those things. We've focused on our movements. We've focused on our jumping and our ability to sprint, and the weight numbers have came. But it hasn't been that we've been chasing these certain maxes and all these things, because, that was another thing that kind of changes. Once you quit chasing numbers, then you start really focusing on the movements, because when you're chasing numbers, it's kind of like, hey, we want to hit this 500-pound squat. And if it's knees are caving at the bottom, it's like, all right, but we got 500. Now we can progress. But, so there's been a lot of that too, that we've adjusted, and we're still a work in progress. follow some really smart guys and got connected through that track football consortium with some really smart people. I've been watching webinars on isometrics and big toe and forefoot rocker and all these different things to help our athletes move better. And it's fun. I enjoy that side of it. I think we can all at some point teach a basic 2-foot, bilateral squat. But, what are some other tools in the toolbox that can help kids be able to move and jump and be more explosive?
Well, everything you've said, I really hope people are listening to this, because we keep coming back to this idea. And you guys, both of us started as football guys. And I think it's fair to say that we've leaned into the strength and the development and the speed development side of things as like kind of a cornerstone of our athletic outcome. Isn't that just a perfect version of the perfect metaphor for a process over product? And it's like you mentioned, if you work on a movement pattern instead of thinking I've got to hit a 500-pound squat, it's funny, your odds of hitting a 500-pound squat or having some fantastic outcome, they actually go up. Instead of, and you use the key word you said early on was healthy. If you think 500-pound squat from the start instead of high caliber movement patterns, that kid's probably gonna get hurt before he gets the opportunity to be great.
Right. Yeah, and I think the other side of it is even my kids that moved well, and I would still try to chase all these high weights without really context of what is it doing to their performance.
Right.
I tell this story. A couple of our best athletes early in my career in 2012, they were our two wingbacks who went to the semifinals. I remember they were both about 165. They both squatted 405 at the beginning of the summer, which is a lot on 160. And then they squatted 405 again at the end of the summer. And I remember I was super mad at them. I'm thinking, you guys should be almost squatting 500. But I'm thinking, they're squatting 405 at 165. That is at the upper echelon of their strength. And, what did we do probably to their spine and their movement pattern by continuing to try to push that max and push it, as opposed to saying, hey, let's try to move that weight faster. Let's try to be, a little bit better with our pattern, whatever the scenario is. Let's focus on maybe some plyometrics with it or some sprint work with it and those types of things. And I think about how much probably more explosive they could have been if we wouldn't have continued to chase higher weight room numbers, but if we would have actually looked at it as a whole. Because we used to test broad jump, vertical jump, and 40s, but that's all we did. We just tested them. Beginning of summer, end of summer, beginning of the off season, end of the off season, but we never really trained it because we just did things and then we hoped at the end it would be better instead of having those metrics. Now we've got a just jump mat that we can test, a consistent way to test our verticals. We broad jump. We've got the free lap timer for the 10s and the 40s. So weekly we're getting metrics on that and figuring out because, we all like to find the holy grail of workouts, but the reality is kids adapt to different things. Some kids can hex bar deadlift and see their power go up. Other kids, they have trouble pushing their feet into the floor and they want to use more lower back. And so they're better off doing, a single leg Bulgarian squat. And so we have to kind of figure out, what's working. And if we prescribe exercises in over 3 to 4 weeks, we start seeing, power output going down or, our sprint speed going down, things like that, then we need to figure out, make an adjustment, which is in the past, we just, everyone ran the same program and everybody did it until the final, the end of the summer. And then we just hope for the best. And then we get mad when it wasn't what we wanted it to be, but we really didn't have a way of gauging it other than as long as they're putting another plate on the side. That's kind of all we look for, and there's so much more to it than that.
I'm with you, and I'm trying to come up with some football metaphors. So as people sort of tune in here, first of all, I encourage people to ask questions if they've got them. But it reminds me of we keep using the term toolbox for a coach's skill set, and there's that old adage if all you've got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, if your entire toolbox is full of hammers, or I'm picturing in this case, if there's one thing that you do like elite, you just got like the best hammer in the world, you could be, and I'm comparing this to an idea. Power is my favorite play. I wouldn't be surprised if you like to play power. But if you were like the best in the world at running power, for those who understand football a little bit, but then didn't have anything to build off of it from, but there's no variability, and all you could do is run power. Now, granted, you might run power as well as anyone in the world, but if that's all you've got, you might look great until you encounter a screw or a bracket or whatever it might be, or you got to saw something in half. And this idea, because dude, I mean, I was the same way. I wanted, and we all fall victim to wanting more in terms of the quantifiables, whether it's more speed or more strength or anything like that. Let me go right to this then. When was it? Like, how did you find the humility to eventually say, okay, what's important is not that this guy squats 500 pounds, but that he plays football better? How did that shift for you?
I mean, it's a multitude of things. So when I got down to Camp Point in 2007, I think they'd only had one winning season in the 50 years, or at least one playoff appearance in the 50 years, I should say.
It's Central High School in Camp Point, right? Okay.
It's actually in the country. It's Camp Point, Golden. It's a whole bunch of towns that make up one rural school. So, yeah, our field is like right in the middle of cornfields, which is kind of cool. But they hadn't had much success. And so I was an assistant for, I think, the first 4 years. We went, I think they were 1-8 the year before. We went 3-6, 5-5, 7-3, 8, and then it was finally 8-3, won our first playoff game. And then we went 10-1, and then it was 12-1, 11-1, 11-2.
Wow.
And then, so that was up to 2014, and I took over in 2011. And so it's like, hey, the things are working well. And then we graduated a big group of seniors, so we had a ton of injuries. We had multiple season-ending injuries, and we snuck in the playoffs and got beat bad by Tuscola. We went 5-5, and then we were back in that 7-3, 8-3 stuff, which isn't bad, but that's not what we wanted. And so we kind of needed a spark. And at that same time, we'd implemented this curriculum-based athletic PE, and I started coaching track. So like my mindset shifted way more outside of just the football realm of things to speed, power development. Okay, now I have a lot of girls in the weight room, and so I've got to try to mesh all this. And so, that started probably in 2016, 17-ish. And then just over time trying to figure out, okay, how can we do what's best for everybody here and not think of it from a football perspective. And then, as I started to see kids train during their seasons, because our in-season work was essentially if the coach trained after school as part of the practice, or like if they came in at 6:30 in the morning, which is not good, obviously, if the kids are doing all these other things. So we didn't have much consistency. So finally I was able to see what that looked like over a year or two, mixed with them trying to play sports. And so this has all been a work in progress on trying to figure out, what do I need to do in my class that helps to supplement what they're doing in their practice and helps them to continue to progress while we keep them healthy, and then do our best to try to make them more explosive and stronger. And so it's still a work in progress, but we're a lot better off than we are. And then, like I said, over that same amount of time, I've been able to create a lot better relationships because there's just more time in a setting of a weight room or while you're resting after sprinting and things like that to have those conversations that sometimes when you're jamming curriculum down their throat in a math class or social studies or English, it's hard to have those conversations sometimes. And so, it's been a lot better on the human, like you said, the humanity side of things to treat them as human beings and not just as, just little weight room warriors, I guess.
That's right. And there's something too. Yeah. It's so interesting that you mentioned that, because I think there is something so, we are of the belief that you measure things in pretty much only two ways. It's results and relationships. It's a heuristic based on those two things. If your outcomes start to improve and your relationships start to improve, you're on probably a solid course. But if one of those falls off significantly, there's room to double back and reconsider. And I think the weight room might provide just such a unique place for that, because you know what it's like. I mean, on the football field, you can make incredible relationships on the football field. Some of the best that I have in my life came there, whether it was peer-to-peer or even some mentor from coaches. But there's something just a little different, maybe slower, maybe more like physical space in the weight room that can't be replicated, whether it's in the classroom or on the field or anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I think kids embrace some of the hard work sometimes in the weight room more than they do like in math. I know me personally, and I was a pretty good student, but I'd much rather struggle and, work to break through plateaus in the weight room than I would struggle trying to learn a calculus concept or something like that. So I think for a lot of kids, and not everyone, but for a lot of them, they kind of embrace that idea because I think they can kind of feel it. They can feel themselves get stronger. Sometimes when you get you understand pronouns better or subject verb agreements, and it's not like, wow, but like when you play better and you jump higher, now you can grab the rim and some of these other things that happen. It kind of creates that dopamine effect, I think, and kids kind of want more and more of it. And then once they start improving, they start thinking that you got some magic pill or something, and you get some credibility when they feel good, you have the relationships, they're not injured, they're having more success in their sport. And that's my ultimate goal in all sports. I don't coach basketball anymore, but I tell multiple kids, I want you guys to be able to dunk it by next year or whatever. And we're going to do what we can to do that. I coach track, but I've got a great relationship with the baseball coach. So it's like, hey guys, let me know how you feel, let me know when you're pitching next. If you pitched last night, how's your arm feel? I'm always asking those questions. And I think as coaches, a lot of times we don't ask those questions. We just expect, hey, this is Tuesday. This is what we do on Tuesdays. You guys are going to suck it up and do it. And I think sometimes at the classroom, if we were a little bit more lenient on how we would get to certain places too, I think we could see a lot more of that. But like I said, everything is so driven by this is what we got to know for this test. Sometimes it forces our hand in those curriculum areas like that we can't have some of those conversations or we can't have some of that flexibility because it's so rigid. Whereas the weight room, yes, we've got standards and things that we expect to do, but there seems to be a lot more of that flexibility on how you're going to get there and then what each day looks like. And I think that's what really helps you solidify those relationships. And I think when we started, we had 2 classes and we had 45-ish or whatever. I can't remember the exact number. In 4 years, we've doubled that. And now we have 4 classes. And hopefully, we can get to where we've got pretty much every athlete that doesn't have some type of academic conflict in those classes.
I think that's amazing. And it's such an empowering thing if you do it right. Strength and conditioning, I've found this, I think, if you're doing it well and testing, it sounds like you guys are testing fairly often, not in any absurd way, but you're keeping track of what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
You can, there's such a clean line between where you are or where you were 3 months ago and where you are now. Whether that ever pans out into you actually dunking or starting for a team, or it may not result in any stat on the field, but you can show these kids how they've grown over time and then remind them that okay, we guided you, but you did that, right? And what an empowering thing that is for an adolescent.
Yeah, I think, one of my mentors, Tony Holler, the track coach at Plainfield, he calls it record, rank, and publish. And if you're not, it's easy for kids to get upset in the short term because sometimes it takes weeks, months. You may be it might be sprint data or squat or whatever the scenario is, and they feel like they've just kind of been at the same. And I say, well, let's go back last year at this time. Last year at this time you were running 5.6, and now you're running 5.1. So I know you went 5.1 for 2 or 3 weeks in a row, and you're really wanting to break into 4s, but you were running a 5.6 at this point last year. And then if we go back to your freshman year, you started at a 6.2 in the 40. And then the kids are like, oh, and next thing you know, it's like, okay, I'm doing all right. But if I don't ever record that data over time and we focus only on what's happening at that moment, kids can get kind of discouraged. So I always try to keep that in perspective and have that data available. I guess things do happen. Sometimes, a kid will get hurt, he'll roll his ankle. We had a broken hand in football this year. And so then they have to kind of start back over maybe from where they were. Coach, I remember I was doing this. Well, hey, you're still ahead of where you were your freshman year. So we're not all the way back to square one, and it'll come back. But, and so we try to do that. And then, kids are competitive. So we'll post, who's in some of these things. We don't do it as much in the weight room anymore. We do have a strength board, but we definitely do in the running and the jumping, because that's how you really get kids to push themselves in those things. I feel like the weight room sometimes takes care of itself when you're in groups of 3 and such, and you guys are training with each other. But sometimes when you're running a 40, if it's not being timed and such, then you're probably not going to get your kids best, because they're just going to run. We try to get our kids to run to show improvement, and everyone's always chasing a better time, or they're the kids are competing with each other. As soon as we get done, they're like, where's your time? And it's like, how much of that stuff happens if you go out and run 4 laps around the track? Who when you're running your mile run in PE is asking the other kid, all excited, where's your time? So that's what I like about the sprint metric. And then like I said, we started measuring like broad jumps over 6 jumps. How far can you go in 6 jumps, which makes kids really push it, or bounding for 6 jumps. Then we've always done the vertical. I do like the vertical too, as a tool of where you're at in your neurology. So like after a game, what's your recovery like? If you're normally a 26-foot vertical jumper on the Vertimax or the just jump mat, and today you're like at 22, you're not very recovered. And so
how do you guys measure that?
I want to do that more. Is so like if I get a baseline, if I know baseline that they're around a 26,
but you have like a Vertex? You have like
no, so we've got what's called a just jump mat. Have you heard of one of those?
Yeah.
So we just got it. So we just got it like earlier this spring or at the end of winter. So I haven't got a chance to use a ton of it. But we had just a tape on the wall, which is fine. But when we're actually trying to measure something and see improvement, there's a lot of margin for error on that just jump mat. Whether it truly is a 26-inch vertical, that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that we do it consistent every time, so I can see where they're at. But I know like a lot of basketball coaches have used it. Let's say they've had a turn, they played Monday and Tuesday. Well, what should I do on Wednesday? Well, let's put them on this mat and see where they're at. And if they're all way, way below, then this probably needs to be a walkthrough, a shooting, some type of practice like that, as opposed to, we didn't play well on Tuesday, so we're gonna run them today because we didn't do this, and that, so it gives you some metrics and figuring out, where your kids are. Football, we try to do enough anyway, like day off, Sunday off, and Monday just sprint work, that by Tuesday we're pretty recovered as it is. But in those other sports, baseball and basketball, where your schedule's all spread out and you don't have a specific night to play, I think it would definitely be an even better tool there.
I hope people are hearing this, because I think you're exactly right. Football, oftentimes you get the opportunity. There's such structure to the football season that you can be really thoughtful about it. I'm concerned that I don't know if concern is the right word, but I think there's definitely a huge opportunity for people who have more sporadic gameplay, a game on top of game, double headers, 2 days in a row. We're in Illinois, both of us, and if there's a rain out on Tuesday and then all of a sudden stuff gets smashed in the back end of the week, that's where some of these can be really, really powerful. Have you heard the name Chris Morris before? I'll send you. We recorded when we had coffee the other day. He's a great guy. He's at Kentucky. And he's got this idea, he calls it fluid periodization. And it is based on all the things that you're talking about. It's constantly gathering feedback. And he doesn't go overboard with it, because there's, like we said in the very beginning, that there's this limit of excuse me. Excuse me, I'll edit that. I'm not that good enough to edit it. There's this limit of like how much text should you use, like how much more valuable could this additional feedback be? Limits there, of course, but I like what you've got. Just jump them. Just jump them and talk to them. That enough could give you a ton of feedback.
There's other things out there like force plates that, I mean, they're pretty and not like the plates that you think. These are, so essentially you've got something at the end and then something at the other end, and then it shoots whatever it does on the ground. So they're not actually landing on a plate, they're landing on the ground, but in between these two, I don't even know what they are. It'll measure your force. So that could be another way if you're trying to figure out, where these kids are. Because I think one of the biggest issues I know we had, like my first year as a head coach in 2011, we probably had the best team we ever had, but we also played the toughest schedule. We were playing Spring Valley Hall and Princeton, schools up your way, Mendota. We were a 1A school co-oping with a few kids that made us 2A, and then we were playing essentially a 3A schedule. And so we made it through a 9-0, but we made it through beat to heck. And so when we got in the second round of the playoffs and we played another, at that time, 10-0 team, we lost to them on the last play of overtime, but our guys were a mere shell of what they would have been if we would have taken into account the recovery. Because we may play a tough game, because we were playing on Saturdays at that point, because our games were so far away, just the way a conference was set up. And let's say we went to Mendota and we beat them like 21-18. And I mean, their guys are carrying their arms through, and our all-state middle linebacker fullback had bruised ribs, and our wingback had a rolled ankle. And we went right back into Monday with everybody. I'm sure those guys did what they could, but we conditioned the heck out of them. Then we put full pads back on them on Tuesday and on Wednesday. And it's like we just continued down this path of regression because we never took into account where they were in terms of recovery. So, who knows at what percentage we took the field in those games as the season went on. And I wish we would have had a mentality, like you said, this has all been a process that we have now, because we would have backed off of them because they were really good and really talented. They didn't need grinder practices, especially at that point. They needed things to continue to stay sharp and be healthy so that they could go out and perform. And as coaches, we were putting them in a worse situation because we were continuing to pound on them in practice, full pads, 2 hours and 15 minutes, when the gameplay was already at such an intense level that they needed some more recovery time. And we were, now our focus is for Friday night. It's not for Wednesday and Tuesday. We want Tuesday and Wednesday to help us for Friday, not Tuesday and Wednesday to be these Bearcats in and themselves. And so that it's taken us a while to do that. And I often get asked, like how I would try to do wrestling or some of these other sports, basketball. And I think you have to think in that same way. You have to have bouts of intensity with bouts of recovery. And those don't have to be bouts of doing nothing. And so, like, what we try to do throughout our practices or throughout our weeks is, if we've got a period of intensity, then we're going to follow that up with a period of drill work or, teaching time.
Sure.
So, if you're going to do 10 minutes of hardcore, 1-on-2 wrestling where guys are rotating in, then you better come back with a period where they've got a chance to recover. Same thing. If you had a tough match duel on Tuesday night, you better come back on Wednesday with a plan of, how can I get work in without adding more to what we just did on Tuesday, because we're not going to be ready for Friday's big tournament invitational if we make Wednesday, Thursday super tough and then expect them to be at their best on Friday.
It's
so
true. It's like more is not always better. I think that's what more and more people, we do. I don't know how much you know about the work we do with the project, but a lot of what we do on the nonprofit consultation side, it's a lot of just evaluation. We have a very core mantra, and we ask people a simple question: does your behavior match your goal? And you'd be amazed at how upset that makes people. And we're on the side of coaches. We're working with people. The people who bring us in, they get to a better place at the back end. Eventually, their behavior does map onto their goal. But having to confront that question is a very difficult one. And I'll tell you, we're lucky. It's not just like high school coaches or even college coaches. We've had the privilege of working with some pretty high caliber folks, professional, Olympic people in business, and it's just like humanity. We forget to come back to that idea. And I'll give you an example from my career very briefly. I remember being in high school and we were good. Okay. And I'm not taking a shot at anyone. You know, I'm super grateful for my experience and for my coaches. We were good. And I remember there's this line. It's so funny. We come back to this idea over and over, this threshold concept. There's a threshold. There's a line beyond which more doesn't necessarily make you tougher. It just might get you hurt. You know, like you're tough enough. And I'm telling you, dude, especially early in the season, there were games where I know that myself and my teammates, we were willing to go as far as we could. Our coaches did a nice job in that sense. Like, we cared about each other. We would have gone through a freaking wall if that's what it took. But we had no legs under us and sometimes couldn't. And that's sort of a strange and helpless place to be. Like, you get off the bus on a Friday night, dragging your freaking legs to the party, and you know how much you're willing to give relative to how much you have to give. That's an important dynamic.
Right. And then so what usually happens if you don't play well because you physically can't, then you get doubled down again the next week. And we used to do it too because, hey, we're not tough enough. So we're going to make practices twice as hard as we did last week because we weren't ready to play. Well, then guess what? That vicious cycle. And I think it was, the Bears head coach, I think he had that comment. A lot of times people, when they get in these losing streaks, it's because we just keep doubling down and tripling down on things instead of just saying, hey, maybe let's try the approach of doing a little bit less. However, that's not how we're wired, especially as football coaches. We're not wired to do less. And if we're not winning, we actually start to do less, then we appear lazy or we appear disinterested. And then no coach wants that mantra to say, hey, look at them down the street. They're only practicing an hour and 45 minutes, when, hey, down the street, they've got, 8 guys standing next to them on the sideline injured, but they're going with that next man up mentality. And it's like, what would you rather want? I would rather have my full team ready to play than to have, 8 guys sitting out or 5 guys sitting out because of the fact that we've been taking people down in practice or, we've been just continuing to, crush them. And we've done that. And since we've kind of changed our approach, our injuries, we haven't lost anyone for the season over the last couple of years. And we've had a few just crazy – we've had 2 broken hands, which is weird. But we haven't had ACLs. We haven't had Achilles. We haven't had labrums, any of that type of stuff that we were dealing with, which it all can happen. Nothing's bulletproof. Right. But when you take the opportunity for injury and you reduce how many chances there are during practice, then that's going to help you stay healthy. Then if you think about it, I don't know what studies have been done, but these big-time injuries, how many of them happen when you're in a state of fatigue of some shape or form? Like at the end of a practice, after you've went 2 hours and now you're in your last team offensive session and somebody's ACL gets rolled up on or whatever the scenario is, and if we can eliminate that or not eliminate it, but if we can try to reduce that. And I see college programs and NFL teams that have injury reports, and I understand there's a lot of things involved, but it's like I would love to know, what do their practices look like and what are they doing that their injury report is double what it is for some of these other people. And I think people need to take that into account. And a lot of times the easy answer is to say, well, kids are just not as tough as they used to be.
Totally. Don't get me started on that. I just want to give you a little bit. One of the studies, Brian Mann, he's down in Miami now. He tracked his kids. There's a study out there, and this isn't even physical. This is primarily psychological, how much you're recovering, how much you're sleeping, all that kind of stuff. Physiological, and there's sort of a combination there. But his kids were 3 times more likely to get hurt during midterms and finals. So just take that as an idea. Like you're overstressed, you're under rested, all these things, and you're just a little bit off, and more likely to get hurt. I mean, it's there, it's clear, it's happening.
Yeah, and people miss out on that neurological part of the body, the brain, and that's the RPR stuff that I've been able to be a part of over the last few years, I guess. It's really taught me that, yes, you have a hamstring. Yes, the muscle needs to be strong. There's a muscular side of it, but there's also a neurological side of it. The brain could use a compensation instead of your hamstrings and use your QL, or could use, whatever the scenario is. And we've got to make sure that we keep the neurological side of things in line and your body working correctly. And the more stress you add to it, the more fight or flight it gets, and the more your body gets to the point where, it's going to kind of hone everything in, because the body is worried that something really bad is going to happen. So it starts saving, some of your major muscle groups, your psoas, your glutes, and those things for that really bad thing that it thinks is happening. And then that's when a lot of these other injuries start to happen, because, our body is in this compensation pattern instead of in a performance mode, because our body doesn't understand a football game versus a grizzly bear chasing us. Our brain just understands that there's some type of stress in our life, and we've got to be ready to handle that stress whenever that comes. And so it doesn't matter about a Friday night football game. It just knows that, hey, we're in a fight or flight mode. And so I think that's where the RPRs really helped me kind of understand that there is a neurological side to the training part, and to injury prevention and things like that. And it's not just how many Nordic curls we can do for our hamstrings and things like that. Right.
Well, it's before we go into the RPR stuff, because there's so much to dig into there. You keep bringing up good points that I want to dig into. I want to talk about something I've heard you talk about before, which is, you said, I want my whole team ready. And that reminded me of the depth that you all try to create. Are you still doing that practice? I heard once you do this off-season practice where you get everyone by a board and you try to name your ideal 22.
Yeah, we actually we actually just normally we would do it when the clinic season rolls around, but we lost out on our Illinois clinic, and then we were actually this past weekend we were supposed to be at the University of Wisconsin. So we usually take one of those days when we get everyone together and we create it. But over the last year or so, 2 years maybe, we've transitioned that to Google Drive. So just last week, I think, I sent out on our Google document the ideal depth chart, and then I tagged the coaches' names in a tab at the bottom. And I said, hey, don't look at anybody else's, fill yours out, with the goal of trying to play as many guys as you can within reason. And then one coach even took it a next step. He goes, here's what I think it should be, but here's my ideal. And so we get different guys thinking about, who can play, because in my mind, I coach quarterbacks, linebackers, and I call the defense and the special teams. So I'm not with the O lineman every day. So I may only think that this guy can play tackle or whatever, but you get like the O lineman coach's perspective or the D line coach's perspective, and all these different people, they start putting different people in different positions. And they'll say, oh, I never thought about him at guard. I never thought about him here or whatever. And it gets you to think outside the box. So we had a big 6 foot, 350-pound nose tackle that's going to go Division II to QU. And then we had a 6'3", 245-pound D tackle that we really wanted to play on one side of the ball, even at our small school level, for the most part. So we had to get super creative, because we had some I guess, off the field things. Our first 3 weeks with some guys being out. So our first offensive line that we played the first 3 weeks went 140 at tight end, 140 at left tackle, 145 at left guard. And, so we made it work. We rotated those other guys in, but we found ways to get other guys on the field. Now it changed how we had to call it. What was our first play call of the year? We ran a jet sweep to the edge. And if we blocked the middle linebacker, it's gone. We weren't going to go foot to foot and try to run wedge with a 140-pound lineman. So, but we had fast dudes. So, we ended up winning all 3 of those games. And we didn't have anyone on our offensive line. And 2 of those teams went to the playoffs. One of those, the team we played week 1, we were their only loss. And then so when we got a few of the other guys back after week 3, then that gave us even more depth. And so we just really focused, especially up front. We can rotate, like our running backs, we rotate them all the time. Sure. But it's hard to rotate. If you've got an O lineman and a D lineman playing both ways, it's hard to rotate those guys in and out of me if they're playing both ways. So we try to develop as much of an offensive line as we can, as much a defensive line. And then, like I said, we'll rotate those backs through. But our goal is to have no more than 5 two-way guys that we can rotate in and out. And in our year that we went and got second, I think we had 4 guys that played both ways, and they were all skill guys that we rotated out. So, I mean, at the 1A level, we have 7 guys going one way, including our entire offensive line. So you talk about, making a huge defensive stand, let's say, in the red zone, their O-line flips the D-line, and we bring on, 5 new offensive linemen. That's a huge advantage. And
huge.
And people say, well, we can't do that. We don't have enough depth. No one has depth. Colleges, Division I colleges don't have depth. The NFL doesn't have depth. You've got to find ways to get creative, And so one thing that I picked up at a clinic 2 years ago, and I've kind of ran with it, is we have to figure out what the person can do. We focus too much on what they can't do. So it's like, okay, we had that 145-pound, those guys playing on the offensive line. Well, we can't ask them to block one-on-one. If Jim Davis is playing D-line across from him, at 220 or whatever you played when you first came to college, he ain't blocking him one-on-one.
240 to be
240. 240.
Yes.
But guess what? We can probably double him up to the backer, or we can release inside of him and trap him. We're not a big read team, but if we were like a midline triple team, we could always read him. Or we can just get to the edge on him. Let's just reach him. We can reach him enough to get to the edge. And then we get him running, and then he gets tired because he's playing 2 ways. Now we might be able to run at him. But we got to figure out how we can use these guys instead of just saying, like you said, if power's my thing, well, power might not be my thing those first 3 weeks. I might have to run play action off. I have to do something else a little bit more deceptive because that's just not what I have right now. Or, yes, when these guys are in the game, we're power, but when we sub, we've got to get a little bit more creative and we did it. We didn't have near the depth this year, but we were able to create ways that we built depth and still, were able to be successful for the most part.
I think it's amazing. And it's you say so many things that are exciting to me and that I've shared with people that I've worked with. That's one of the most compelling ones. And I was so happy to hear you say it. And I think I probably said it around the time you say you got second, just so everyone knows that, like, you guys went to the state championship. You were in, was it in Champaign or was it in DeKalb?
It was in Champaign, yeah.
Yeah. So you guys are in the state championship game, about to pick up a trophy, and looking at things in a way that I think is really refreshing and needed. When you say, because I'm with you. Everyone's out there saying, well, we don't have depth. Well, of course you don't if you don't work to build it. Right. Nobody is just has a stockpile of Division I athletes. And so I just think I think it's refreshing to hear. Let me also throw this out. I wonder if you'd agree. Working in strength and conditioning has caused me to even see that concept more clearly. So we 2 years ago, team I coached for in my day job, we had a defensive line. We played a 3-man front, and each one of those guys, the smallest guy or the shortest guy was 6'3", and the lightest guy was 265. That's a fact. This was absurd.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't just fall into your lap every time. All 3 of them are college players. One of them actually right now is the number 2 recruit in the state. He was playing as a sophomore that year. And I'm not outing anything. I'm very grateful for my job. But we have to be willing to confront these truths. We got to the playoffs, and all 3 of those guys are going both ways. And I'm telling you that just from, you mentioned the neurological system, the fatigue and the actual muscle belly and fibers, and the way that these 3 big, huge vehicles are meant to operate, they just can't, there's not enough gas in the world to keep them going both ways in a way that's intense enough to essentially perform well and finish games. It's an impossibility. They were going because they cared. They just couldn't. There's no pop. There's nothing left in the engine there.
And that's why, I tell people a couple things. If that was the best way, then college and the NFL would do it. Because those are the best athletes. Those 300-pound dudes in the NFL can run sub 5 and 40. If anyone could play both ways and be explosive, it would be them. And then the second thing is you may have a clear number 1 fresh at the start of a game and the start of practice, but that clarity is not going to be there by the third quarter or by the fourth quarter. And people say, well, we just got to condition more. no, because if you're running gassers and bear crawling, you're doing things at such sub-max that you're actually not even training the system that they're going to need in a game. And I forget which college team it was that had all the cramping, and their coach it happened. It was Florida or South Florida. It was one of those schools. I can't even remember now. But he essentially called out all his players in the media and said, well, we're not in shape enough, so we got to start running more. When the reality is they had never done anything at full speed. So it's that muscle reflex that, cramping. People think, well, it's all this dehydration and all this stuff. You're making the muscle do something that repeatedly that it hasn't done. And so if you do everything at a sub-max, go 80% in practice, and then you expect them to line up and go to 100%, the body can't respond to that. And so, that was, and they blamed it all on the players. Well, the same thing, if you ask this 265-pound guy to play at his best for 4 quarters, both sides of the ball, it's not going to be that great. No. He's going to have to take plays off somewhere. And it's not that he's lazy. It's that he just can't. And so
he physically just can't.
Yeah. Hey, here's a series. Let's say he's our right tackle. All right. So let's get him out for this series. Let's put this kid in. He's not as good. But I'll tell you what, he does a great job on backside reaches. He does a great job pulling. So let's run counter when he's in. Let's not run right at him. Let's run away from him. Or let's go play action because he doesn't pass block too bad. And so, we've created play, at our level, when we went to the state championship game, we ran 9 different running backs, and 6 of them were really, really good. So we had a lot of depth. Our playbook was essentially open. This year we had a lot of younger. We had 2 really good wings. We're a 3-back double wing team, and then we had some younger guys that weren't near ready for varsity football. So we actually had sections in our call sheet when we had subs at these wings. Here's what they did well. We could throw it to them. We could get them the ball on the edge. They could fake really well. And so we created sections to say, hey, when this guy's in the game, this is what we can run. We already had it built into our game plan, as opposed to, okay, when we're at our best and we have our best dudes in, we're great at this. Then we sub out our best wing. We sub in a substitute. We try to run the same thing, and then we get mad because the substitute's not as good, but we already know he's not as good.
Right.
And so it is crazy. We do this, and then we sub them right back out because we can't win with them and then we bring the other guy right back in when it's like, hey, let's figure out ways to use them. And so I always challenge coaches, find some depth, because Alabama doesn't have the same left tackle. If Alabama's playing Georgia, their number 1 left tackle goes down. Their number 2 is not the caliber of the guy who's going across from Georgia either. Everyone has that scenario, no matter what level you're at. So you got to figure out, what are you going to do? And then the other thing that I'll say is, if you're that, the best 11 play, how hard do the next 11 actually practice? If they know that, hey, the coach is rolling with these guys, these are his guys. But if they know, and we tell our guys, hey, guys, we want to play 20. If we can play 18 or 20 guys, we're going to play. If you will demonstrate to us in practice that you can be helpful in some fashion, down blocking, pass setting, run stuffing, rushing the passer, playing coverage, we will use you. And it kind of empowers those kids to actually work a little bit harder because they actually see an avenue to get on the field. Whereas, if they're not as good as Johnny and they know they're going to be behind him all year, it's kind of like, some kids are still going to work hard. Don't get me wrong, but there's some kids that aren't going to work quite as hard as they would if they actually believed they had a chance to play on Friday night, and not just when so-and-so gets hurt.
No doubt. And I wonder if that Brian Mann concept is reminding me of something. So I'm picturing the ebbs and flows of a season. I'm just a hypothetical kid. I see the writing on the wall by week 4. You're telling me, coach, be a monster on scout team. I've never seen the field unless it's garbage time on a Friday night. I get it. I'm still in. I'm trying. Fine. And so you sort of max that out as much as you can. Okay, well, then midterms and stuff come around and finals. That kid is now forced – that kid's now exhausted. He's got all these other injury risks we talked about with Brian Mann. How good could your scout team possibly be at that point in the season? Now, then you ask the question, so how good could your exhausted first team then be going against a scout team that's not going at full speed? You mentioned, I don't know what the term you used before, but sort of these cycles, these degrading cycles that move over the course of the season. And really, when you start to dig into it, it's really not all that surprising.
No, it's not. But I mean, it's something that we didn't think about for the longest time, and we've
Sure.
been pretty good with numbers. But like, you know, people are having numbers issues, and they say, well, we don't have depth. It might be because you're literally only playing 11 guys. So why am I going to go out? Why am I going to buy into your off season, do all this stuff in the summer, do everything in practice, never even get a chance to play, and then all of a sudden do it again the next year if I didn't have a good experience. But if I know, and like I said, we tell our kids, like, we're not just handing out spots. I mean, if we have to, we're going to play the guys. But here's the deal,
Right?
And like, we'll just have a real conversation. So like, here's a great example. So we lost our big 6 foot, 350 pound nose tackle. So we were in the playoffs, and it was like team offense. And so I'm not in charge of team offense, and it was during the playoffs. So then our D-line, or another guy was running the scout. So I just happened to have one of our big freshman D tackles that's going to be a sophomore coming back. I said, hey, I go, you know, our two big guys are graduating. I said, those guys are graduating. I said, look around. You know, who do you think's maybe the next in line? And he was kind of like, I guess it could be me. I'm like, yeah. Like, you're only going to be a sophomore, but understand that this whole offseason, you need to think, hey, I want to get on the field because I have the size and can have the ability, if I work hard, to be in that spot. And so just that little conversation, and then like all offseason is like, you know, he's worked his butt off, and we'll find a way to use him. I don't know if he'll start. I don't know if he'll play half the game, but he is now empowered to believe as a incoming sophomore that he has a chance to play on the varsity level. And if he works hard, we will find a way to play him in some fashion. You know, we're not done. We're not going to play 20 kids if 10 of them are going to get hurt out there or going to get somebody else hurt. I mean, but the more you empower other kids to see that they have a chance to play, the more you'll probably get out to come out for your team, and the better the experience they're going to have, and the more healthy you're going to stay, and so forth. And then at the end of the day, you just got to accept the results. You know, you have what you have.
Right.
Now, some years do we have teams that can play for a state championship? Yes. So, is that every year? No. We've went to one state championship in, 7 years of Central High football, but consistently year in and year out, we're going to win 10 games and we're going to play hard, and teams know that when they show up, they're going to have to play very well because we're going to. Like this year,
at least competing for a conference championship every year. Is that?
Yeah. Every year, we've won, I think we won 6 in the last 10 years. And I think we finished second in those other years. And, so we've been able to stay consistent because we've built that depth, and we've got good numbers out for a small school. I'm hoping to be in the mid 50s again this year for a 1A school. And, our kids feel like, hey, coaches care about us now because they're not just burying us into the ground. And we're still a work in progress on figuring out, our offense coordinator sent me a cool little practice thing that we want to try this year to help kind of do that game speed transition thing when we were talking about that. And we're always making changes. We're always a work in progress. I think if your principles are sound in terms of, we want to encourage kids to work hard. We want to encourage them to do everything they can to get on the field. We're going to try to play them as much as we can. We're going to teach them the fundamentals. We're going to find ways to use them, then you can tweak your scheme. You can tweak your practice schedule. You can tweak all these other things to make that useful. But that's kind of our parameters is we're trying to play as many guys every Friday night as we possibly can.
I love that idea, man. And just the depth thing, you like, nobody's got it. You build it, and then also you retain it. That's such an interesting thing to think, because we talk about character concepts like grit and resilience and delay of gratification and things like that. Like, if coaches utilize those as well, that's important. It's not all grit. The delay of gratification, if you've got to sort of take it one year, maybe you don't accomplish everything that you had your heart set on, but in the positive experience that was built, you retain more, and then ultimately are able to capitalize down the line in the future, because the sophomore that's starting for you as a senior didn't drop out because you put the hammer down too hard when he was a sophomore. You start to think more holistically like this.
Right. and then you may not get as much, you get that group of 13 seniors that comes through your program. They play everything. Boom, you win 12 games, and then the next year you win 3 because all those juniors didn't play because maybe they weren't at the same level. But if and we did it, and you probably heard me say this in our year we got second. We took a 3-year starter at linebacker, all conference player, and we decided we were only going to play him at quarterback because we thought we had depth. And so we played a junior inside linebacker that now graduated or is graduating this year. Ended up being a really good linebacker, started that whole season. So he was able to, instead of having to replace 5 linebackers off of that team, and we graduated 13 seniors off our team that got second. We came back with 11 juniors that also played a ton. We had, I think, 6 or 7 junior starters on our defense and 9 senior starters on our offense. So, yeah, our offense was a work in progress this year, but we still had a building block because we didn't play those same 9 kids on the defensive side. Now they did. And like I said, you got to be smart. If it's a heavy power run team, then maybe you're going to play your biggest dudes. But if it's a spread RPO team, then maybe you're subbing in a different defensive line and you're playing your smaller dudes. And so you got to be smart with it. Like I said, you don't want to jam a round hole in a square peg and do something just because someone told you need to do depth. You've got to figure out those ways on how you're going to create it. And at the beginning, it may only be for a few plays at a time. It may be a series at a time until you feel comfortable. Because that's the other thing I always tell coaches. You can't just take what somebody else is doing in their program, like Nick Saban, and then just jam it into yours and expect it to work. Right. You have to believe in it, number one. And a lot of coaches have a hard time believing that the best 11 don't play. So if you decide you're going to go into this season and say, okay, we're going to start it. Coach Dixon said he talked to Jim Davis on April 6th that you should have an offense and a defensive line separate. So you go in there and then you get beat by 50 in week 1. You're like, well, that was stupid. Oh, we're going back to, or whatever. It's like, no. But guess what? Maybe in your mind, you might think, okay, we're going to rotate. We have 3 tackles. We're going to rotate them in every couple of series. That might be where you start. And then you kind of go from there and figure out what you can accept as a coach, what you can teach your players to be able to accept and believe in. Our players understand. They understand why we're playing as many guys. They understand why we're subbing them out. It's not a secret. They understand what our expectation is, to where when I ask them and they verbalize it back, they can say it better than I can. I had some do it for a presentation. I just gave them some questions and had them answer back on, why do we practice the way we do? Why do we substitute? And their responses were better than I could articulate, but they know
That's a smart idea, actually.
And they respect it. Our big 350-pound nose tackle was a freaking stud, and everyone had to decide whether they were doubling him, running away from him, or what. Now, if we also played him at tackle, he would have been average at both spots. But because we played him at nose, he was an absolute game changer because he was fresh and he respected it. We didn't try to condition him down to 315 pounds or whatever. We sprinted him, we got him faster, and then he was able to be just a complete game changer for us.
I'm messing with your video real quick here. Sorry, it shut off. Did that work? You start it again?
Yeah,
awesome.
It's up.
That's exactly right. And that kind of kid might be the perfect example when you go back to the physiological thing. How could you possibly build a motor that can make 350 pounds go fast, playing every single rep of every single game? That it wouldn't work.
Yeah. And the kid is such a nice kid, and as coaches, if we try to make him do something that he can't, then it hurts the relationship, because then you think all of a sudden that the kid is choosing. But no, this kid, we got it. I couldn't imagine moving as well as he did at that size. And, and so it's just, he had a niche. And like I said, we're good friends with a lot of the teams that we play, obviously. We don't have, and they, after the game or even sometimes before, it's like, gosh, we have no clue how we're going to block this guy or whatever, the scenario is.
So he's the one you said he's going to go to Quincy? Is that
Yeah, he's going to QU. I think they're actually going to start him on the offensive line. So, they know their roster. But, we were able to – but he was another kid we got in as a freshman. That's another good point. So he wasn't as big as a freshman.
Sure.
But we were rotating him in, and by the end of that year, he was playing in those last 2 or 3 games as a freshman. And then as a sophomore, he rotated in. He was never a starter until his junior year, but he was a kid that, because of his size, we were able to use some freshman year, some sophomore year, and then junior and senior, he was able to be very
and that sort of talent evaluation, the ripple effect of just being thoughtful as a coach and evaluating the talent and said, maybe this isn't an every down kid, but we can get him 4 plays a game, 5 plays a game. The spark that might light underneath him going into the offseason, going into the next year, you don't know what that means. And it's just not that freaking hard to do. We find, especially on D-line, this is my experience, I love coaching D-line. I did it for years, and it was one of the most fun positions to coach because we used to have guys who you could gear them up psychologically. Like we had this one kid, Ryo, wonderful kid. We're like, Ryo, you're the tenderizer. Here's your job. You're going to go in 2 plays in a row. We're never going to ask you to go in more than 2 plays in a row. And you are going to tenderize the center. You're just going to, just going to go, that's it.
Yes.
And he knew his role, and he got so jacked up, and he's on the sideline. We almost have to hold him back and pull him off because when the tenderizer goes, he's got one speed, and you can sort of play into this. And like you mentioned, all of a sudden you've got a 140-pound defensive end for whatever the situation is. Fine, but maybe he's fast, and maybe the 8 plays a game that he gets, they're probably passing situations, and that kid just gets to unleash whatever he's got. That's exciting.
And that was the other thing. So this year we rotated our big guy a little bit more at tackle, not that much. But when we got second that year, when we had a totally new offensive line, we would bring this guy in to play like guard when we get down near the goal line. And he loved it. It's like you say, like, hey, this is our heavy. We'd just have a heavy package. Boom, he'd come running off the field, jacked up, ready to get off the ball. But it's like, if he was playing guard the whole year, I guarantee you, after he got done playing D tackle, he's not sprinting over there to the offensive huddle getting jacked up to play.
No doubt.
So it's hard to go against the norm, and that's kind of where I think track got me down that road. And then some of these other coaches that I've gotten to know have just kind of convinced me that it's okay. If you believe in it, you've got to be willing to accept the results and not do because you can win playing guys both ways. You can. You can win so many different ways. Not everyone does it the same. Not everyone runs the same scheme. Not everyone practices the same, and so forth. So you've got to figure out what you think helps your team best and live with it, and be mindful of what other coaches are doing, obviously, to get improvements, but don't judge your program when you do something based upon what someone else is doing down the street, or not be willing to do something different because, gosh, I don't know, if we do that, that's and you just have to be willing to sometimes take that leap. And for us, we were very fortunate that we had a really good group that we got second with. So we started this leap towards, our practice adjustment and sudden, and at the end of their junior year. So like in the fall, the last few games of 2017. So then in 2018, we decided to go all in. So, that might be another thing for coaches to understand, do it in stages, whatever, however you can try to make it work. Because I answer, a lot of these questions a lot of times, and it's just like, I can't tell you how to do it with your kids and where you're at. I don't know what your coaches can do. I don't know what your athletes are about.
Right.
This is what we do because, we've either been forced to do it that way, someone showed us a better way, or we just learned it over time. Mm-hmm. So I can't tell you exactly what you need to do, but here's some things you can start with, and then hopefully you can kind of figure it out and create it and make it your own.
You're exactly right. And we often call, we refer to like a coaching fitness. And instead of saying like, what's the one thing I can do to change my program immediately, or what's the one absolute, we work too often in absolutes, I think. What is a set of tools, and this is we've been talking about this a lot today, or what you just said. Here's 5 things you can do next week, coaches, but you've got to take them into your place and evaluate your people. You mentioned how well can your coaches essentially administer these ideas? How receptive are your kids to these ideas? There's so many contexts to consider that there's no other way to do it than, like you said, keep bringing in good information, be willing to try new things, and then just ask yourself a very simple question. Is it working in the ways that we intended? How do we have to adjust? So I guess as we as we sort of come full circle on this, can you give us an outline of your practice week? And I don't want you to rehash. People can find your resources everywhere, and I highly encourage them to do that. But you mentioned this track background. What does a week look like for you all? And yeah, I think that'd be helpful.
So I'll start with just that. So we play our games on Friday. So I'll start with Saturday as the beginning of the next week. We give our kids Saturday and Sunday off completely from meeting in person with Huddle and all this technology. And we use Google and so forth that we share notes. We share things with our kids without having to sit down with them on the weekends. Because that recovery is important, especially, we've got some trips that are 2 hours. Sometimes we don't get home till 11:30.
Sure.
By the time they get to bed, it's after midnight. We used to bring them in early. We just don't. We tell our kids what our expectations are in terms of not doing things you're not supposed to do, and then, doing things you're supposed to do as far as your film prep and such. And we communicate with them through the weekend. And then Monday when we bring them in, we do our film. So we'll show them a few things that we need to from the week before. And then we'll show them the new stuff for the week, whatever we have, our opponents. And so a lot of times we'll have breakout sessions. The offensive groups will go breakout, the defensive groups 15 minutes short. It's about like a classroom. You don't want them in there watching 3 hours of film. And then we do RPR and we do sprint work. And then we go home on those Mondays, and the coaches go to the lower level games because we play. So we don't take the field. If there was a concept that we wanted to introduce or something, we could. We maybe did that once in the playoffs. We wanted to walk through a couple things. We just did that in the gym. And then Tuesday we just wear helmets, and that's kind of our game plan install. So our kids haven't been in pads since Friday, so now they've had Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and now they're just helmets Tuesday. We teach our kids how to hold the collision bags, and we do everything that way. So we can see footwork and all that, and without beating on each other. And then Wednesday's our full pad day. And so we'll usually start with some type of sprint period, whether that's special teams or in our individual drills. And then we'll do a little bit more team oriented stuff. And then Thursday we do wear shoulder pads on that day just to fit in and that kind of stuff. But we do our Thursday walkthrough, and then we play on Friday night. So our kids are only in full pads on Wednesdays, and we never take anybody to the ground. We're that thud tempo when we are. I guarantee our team sessions are, we may run a total of 10 plays. We may run 8 plays. We may run 6 on a certain day. We don't line up and go for 40 minutes and run 35 plays. And so we're still trying to find creative ways to make those more meaningful, more game type reps. And so those are things that we're talking about this offseason, instead of just putting the ball on the 50, running 15 plays at 80%. If we're running team plays, we want them to be at 100% as best we can. And then a lot of times we allow our kids to walk back so that we can repeat that same effort. And we coach during that time. Now there's times we do tempo. There's times that we're going to go fast and we're going to go no huddle and get on the ball. But then there's times we're going to run a play to the best of our ability, and then we're going to walk back and get ready to run it again, instead of always being in this state of movement and then never being able to run those plays at full speed. And so we mix that in. And then, like I said, we play Friday night. And then we start the same process over. When we get to the playoffs, we give them that first Monday off too. So we actually give them every Monday off when we get in the playoffs, because now we don't play till Saturday. So we just move everything back. So now our kids play Saturday, they recover Sunday, Monday, and then they're in helmets. Then Tuesday becomes our sprint day. We're in helmets on Wednesday. Thursday becomes full pads. Yep. Friday's our walkthrough, and then we play on Saturday. So our kids usually get like 100 hours off before we before we practice our first round playoff game. It's pretty awesome, because we get done on that.
It is awesome. And it's so refreshing and no pressure, but I need you to keep winning, dude, because that's the proof will be there, results and relationships.
It is.
Yeah. And healthy kids who want to play, they're ready to go fast.
Yeah. And I mean, it's our niche where we're at, because like I said, some years we have those 300-pounders, but a lot of times we don't. We've got multi-sport kids. We got kids that would rather play baseball and basketball, but they play football because they want to be a part of it. We've sent one kid Division I to Western Illinois, and he was a kicker. So we don't get we've only we probably only sent a handful of kids to play college football. That's just, we're a rural community. Our kids work, they work hard for us, and then they go to school or they go to work, and they usually don't go to play football. So we're trying to do the best with what we can, and in our situation, that's all we can do.
Well, and I love the way you're doing it. So here's my final question for you. If you had to give, you got to give advice, mental and physical, what are a couple things that you advise people to sort of hang their hat on moving forward?
I'd say from the mental side, I think coaches need to understand just how wired up our kids are all day long. We're never get breaks. We're always wired up. We're always connected. We're always online. We're always on phones. We're on the computers now in school all day long, and that plays a factor. And so there are times that they need a day off. They just do, just to recover and reset even the mental aspect of it. So we don't ask our kids to watch hours and hours of film and create all these huge cut ups and things. And we give them specific things. We try to focus on their, the opponent's best few things. But, we ask them to watch practice, and then we, as coaches, we send them a few things to look at. But, we're not asking them to spend hours now. I mean, that's the coach's job to game plan. We don't want them thinking too much. I think sometimes coaches expect their players to, diagnose everything throughout a game. And it's like, hey, I want you worried about that. I've taught you to read that guard from day one. So Here it is. Here's what he's doing. Like, what he does when he blocks down. And so that's all I care about. I don't care about, this RPO and all that stuff. So we try to cut all that stuff out. We try to give them those basic things from a mental side. And then we try to mix in fun things, try to change it up mentally, like in class too. There's times, if I think we've been going pretty hard, like a Friday, we'll go play wiffle ball, or we'll go do something like that from that mental side, just to try to keep it fresh. And the weekend really helps them get away for a little bit and be kids and have fun. Same thing in the summer from a mental aspect. Don't make them show up 5 days a week and do stuff, because they kind of need that. And then physically, strength is important, but I think coaches put so much value in strength that they lose sight of the explosion and the power and the sprint work. And if you gave most coaches a half hour, they're all going in the weight room and squatting. Very few of them would jump and sprint. And I think you need to have balance. And I think you need to make sure that you are measuring those other things, because at a certain point, the strength can and does become counterproductive to a certain kid. So if they're continuing to get stronger, but they're running slower and they're jumping, not as high, and they're not as explosive, then we need to reassess what we're doing. And so we try to look at it as a whole, and we always try to do all of our, our sprint work and that such when the CNS is fresh on the first part of the week. And we try to make that a huge focus, and we use strength, honestly, to supplement what we're doing in that speed and explosion part, I guess, as opposed to the opposite. And we try to, we use this term, we slow cook it. So, we're not chasing max numbers freshman year, sophomore year. We're trying to build that movement pattern and understand that, the strength will come as a result of how we're doing it, as opposed to, us trying to see how many 300-pound squatters we can get in a given year, which I used to do. Like everything, that I've said that we don't do as much, we all did at some point.
Right.
So I guess those would be some things, kind of some long-winded answers, I guess.
No, those are great answers, man. And I love that part of it. So you say a lot of refreshing things. That's why I'm so excited to have you on and share this message with people. And I like that it's built off of a real place. You practice what you preach. You've tried these things that you are sort of recommending against. Recognize that they didn't work as well as you wanted to, so you adjusted. I think that's all you can do. And now by sharing, people can benefit from that experience without having to do the same thing to a kid.
I'll share one last thing. And it empowers kids, because we talk about why we do things. That I had a Zoom call with next year's seniors a couple nights ago, and our all-state running back, who's coming back this next year. I asked him, is there some things you guys, and he said, I'd like to get some more full speed reps in practice, because I felt like sometimes in games I couldn't repeat those plays as much. So like you empower those kids to let you know how they feel and what they think. And we talked about it as the season went on, that probably earlier in the year we erred too much on the side of doing less, and we should probably need to mix in some more, we need to do some more full speed reps. We need to crowd some more plays together and things like that. And, but this was a kid that was willing to step out. There's, his classmates were all on a Zoom call, and something that he shared with me just 3 nights ago. And
awesome.
I think when you're a top down driven, this is how we practice, and, we're going to run you, we're going to make you tough. Like those kids don't feel like they're empowered to share, what they think. And the kids are they're the smartest kids out there. They know what they feel like. They know how, what they feel like going into a Friday night. But if you don't ever give them that chance to tell you about that, then you're never going to know the pulse of your team.
That's exactly right. It's funny that you say that, because you're right. If you don't create a culture where you can communicate in both directions, then you are absolutely going to miss some really important nuggets of information. You've got to be able to communicate with your kids. I do. This is just sort of a personal question. It's not that personal, but from my own experience, say you get a tough loss on a Friday night, and you're saying you give them both days off. Saturday they're not coming in. What sort of messaging do you send home? You know what I mean? How do you communicate once they, if you're not with them?
Yeah, we tried it. So, we've had that. We lost to Beardstown for like 4 years in a row, and they've been really good. They've got a Division II running back. But like in our year, this year we lost to them. We were ahead at half. The last year we went to the state championship game. We scored first, and it was back and forth, and then they just kind of physically beat us up. And then the 2 years prior to that, we lost on the last play of the game. So it's been a great battle. But like, so I'll go back 2 years ago. It was a matter of we totally once that game got going and it started, because it was the first time we'd really been challenged. Our guys went totally away from their technique and started trying to do their own thing.
Yep.
And so with that was our focus. It wasn't. Our guys were good. We were physical. They were strong. They didn't play like it. Because a few bullets started firing, they started trying to do their own thing. And so we went back into film, we had playlists of our lack of technique and why we weren't successful in doing those things. And so, it was tough film for them to watch, but we didn't say, oh, we're putting the film away, you guys. We didn't go out and run miles and miles and gassers and do all that. We just said, here's the deal. We've got to get better, and you've got to be able to execute your technique against good competition, or we've got to find the next guy that's going to be able to do it. And, we reeled off whatever it was, 10 straight wins after that, and played for the state championship. It was a good loss because, we hadn't honestly been challenged much up to that point. And then it really showed us why we need to do the technique that we're taught to do, because when, you can get by with that when you're playing a lesser opponent, getting by with some of your bad habits. But, and even as coaches, things look better when you play against a bad team than they do when you play against a good one. So we focused on what we did right and wrong. And we had a good tone. We just said, we're not going to go where we want to go. We didn't go in there and say, hey, guys, you did your best, No, we explained to them. And we were very, very direct on why we weren't successful. We didn't talk in some vague toughness, and it's like, you've heard me talk about this before, but coaches talk in all these vague terms. We're just not physical enough. We're not, that's a crappy, just anybody in the crowd can say that. Literally anybody that can say that. Oh, they're just getting their butts kicked. Like, so we went right down. Your first step, you stood up and you're trying to look and see where the play is going instead of shooting your hands and say, and so boom, that's where we went to. We went to all those things, and and that's and our guys responded, and like I said, we were able to reel off a lot of victories there.
A lot of victories. So, dude, I really hope people listen to some of this stuff. I'm gonna write on this, because I've been trying to find a way to get a lot of your ideas out to people, just so you know. I don't want to steal the secret sauce. The implementation is key. That's what's going to get you where it is. But I think from an ethical perspective too, I'll tell you something. This is real. This happened within 6 months, of right now. A coach glamorized this story of his high school coach that used to literally, I couldn't make this up if I wanted to, literally have kids run into a brick wall.
Yeah.
And I'm not, people might think that I'm messing around right now. Literally, he had his kids run into a brick wall to toughen them up. This isn't happening at this moment in time. The coach was sort of thinking back in the day and sort of glamorizing that. With these vague abstractions, like you say, of like, well, we just got to toughen them up somehow. So,
yes.
I can't say it without laughing, without literally running. It's nonsense.
And what you'll find out is when you cut out all that stuff, your practice can be so much shorter when you're not lining up and doing all this stuff. And, find ways to do it within drills and such, and, within your team times, and cut out all those things that you can't measure. You can't measure toughness. It isn't. And the thing I always say, like, your toughest kids, it when you see, like, I can tell when I see the freshmen come in, like, I know who they are already. So now how can we use these other guys? How can we teach them what to do, how to do it, and to do it well? But we know when the push comes to shove, we want to make sure these guys are where we need them to be,
right?
Because they just have it, and the other guys will either try to raise their level up, or we'll replace them. And that's kind of we're not going to run them into submission. We're not going to run them into a brick wall like 10 times, and that all of a sudden will make them into this, Billy Badass or whatever. So
it's absurd. So I think we have an ethical obligation to show people that not only is that ridiculous, but it also just doesn't pan out as well. And I'm thinking, I could talk all day to you about this stuff, man, but I'm thinking also, like, I wonder legitimately as a player and a coach, how many losses my teams have experienced because of lack of toughness. And I don't know, if I reflected back, maybe I could say a team quit here and there, but I bet it's pretty rare. I think if you're committed enough to go through an off season and a full season and show up every single day, you probably have like the base level of toughness to play the game. It's missed assignments. It's adherence to the script. It's, X, Y, and Z.
It's expecting a guy that's not as good as the guy across from him to do something for an entire game just because that's what you think is best. You've got to find the way. Like if that D line is huge, well, guess what? This is not a downhill run game. This is a lateral run game until they get tired, and then it becomes a downhill run game, or it's some play action. Or it's counter. We get them. We can't just line up and say, hey, this is who we are. We're a power run downhill, and then but they go 308, 290, and 305.
Right.
We've got to use common sense in that regard, and try to do some other things to wear them out. And then if they're playing both ways, I know that we can wear them out. And that's what we tell our kids. We share. For every game, we say, hey, they got 9 guys going both ways. And we try to use that to our advantage. We do.
Yeah. Well, I think it's smart. We could go all day on this, but we're going to have to cap it for now. I got to ask you, are you still drinking coffee? What do you got there?
I just got black coffee. I'm a black coffee guy. I got a Hall of Fame cup from the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
I love it.
I just a black coffee guy. We actually got my offensive coordinator is the calculus teacher, so he's got like an industrial pot in his room, and so I'm doing PE, and in between classes I'll go down and fill up, and so we usually drink probably a pot and a half to 2 pots each day.
Attaboy. I like it. It's good fuel. And do you have is there a preferred type of coffee? Is there like a local spot you guys go to, or?
We actually just had a place open up right before all this stuff went down that my wife really likes because she's into the other types. I don't even know what they all are.
Sure.
But I just usually get Dunkin' Donuts. That's kind of just what I get. So
Dunkin's delicious. I got to give a shout out real quick because that's the nature of the show. We remember InnKeepers. I don't know if we ever went there. I don't think it's as many. It's in Galesburg. Finance College. Not a lot. Not as many students go as I think folks around the town. Although if any students are listening, I highly encourage they go. So I have a grinder. I ground up some beans, made some InnKeeper coffee.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah. All right, Brad. Well, thank you for everything, man. I hope we can. I appreciate all that you're doing. I mean it when I say I think you're advancing the profession, and I think a lot of kids are going to benefit from it. So.
Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you doing this and trying to share as much stuff as you can. It takes an avenue like this to be able to get information out. So I appreciate that.
I think it's meaningful.